Thank you so much for joining the session here with me. Thank you for reinventing, and I hope I'm not the last one standing before we all break out for the day. I'm excited to talk about how we do AMI automation through a factory-led approach. And we have a unique perspective in terms of like how we are modernizing the cloud operations, AMI management, through building in reliability, security, and cost-conscious behavior. And one and last, we want to talk about the outcomes as well through having an AMI factory. So while compute in AWS world has evolved a lot through serverless and also through containers, EC2 is still by default the most customizable platform that has different kind of workload addressable markets, right? Whether you want to build a custom application, run custom application with what you would need in terms of compute, storage, memory, network, and even operating system, EC2 are the choice. And what powers EC2 is basically Amazon Machine Images. And if you look at Amazon Machine Images, while it provides the foundational capability for you to run your application, for you to build your applications, it's not easy to maintain and manage when you have a large-scale ecosystem. And this is where AMI management is very crucial when it comes to how do you scale your operations with respect to having multiple AMIs, having it go through the right level of automation, having it make sure it functionally works and not have to scale through resources and through the capacity. And number two, does it really address your application and your business services availability and performance? That is also very critical. And also to keep a tab on your cost, to make sure that cost is not a lagging parameter, it's a leading parameter. And when you have multiple groups, multiple application teams, business teams, product teams working together to develop your application, to deploy it on AMI, and then to be able to run it in production, how do you bring the ease of governance with respect to having multiple teams collaborate to have a single joint code base of AMI and to be able to develop that? That is another important challenge. This is where we are working with large-scale enterprise, whether it's medium or even like it's Fortune 50, Fortune 100. They set up what is called as an AMI factory to be able to create the bakery with all the right images with respect to the foundational AMI, with respect to the application builds, and that is how we handle AMI as a large. So what is Hitachi Vantara doing in this space of managing AMIs and also managing cloud workloads, right? We have a differentiated point of view with respect to how we are looking at the workload in totality, right? It's not about infrastructure, it's not about application machine image or AMIs, and then it's not about the data, it's not about the security, all in isolation. Together, at the end of the day, it is a workload, it is a product. This is the first unique way of looking at how do you run your cloud workload in a more effective way. So looking at it as a product-centric view, creating a common backlog with respect to not just the feature functionalities, but even your AMI, reliability, security, and cost, and all the non-functional requirements baked into a single backlog is an essential view. We talk about reliability and resiliency a lot, while cloud offers a lot of durability, through 9 lines, 11 lines of durability, high availability. But how does your workload take advantage of that, right? Do you do failure mode effect analysis? Do you do chaos engineering of your AMIs at the right stage? So building reliability and resiliency is a very key component of how you secure and how you build your workloads to run in the right way. And then the third part of it is like, it's not just about, someone building the AMI, someone deploying applications on top of AMI, and then like deploying it into production where the ops teams take care and run from a day two perspective, right? You need to bring them into the loop as you do the design, as you do the development, and that is a very critical component of like how we are integrating DevSecOps to be a true DevSecOps. And again, gone are the days where DevSecOps means you're deploying the code through a single button and it moves from one environment to another environment and then it runs. But it needs to mean all the way up to production. It needs to mean all the way in terms of how it's running and where you have good visibility and handle with respect to cost, reliability, security, and availability as well. So when you look at AMI factory, right, I think we have talked a lot about the principles. What are the layers which kind of like makes up the AMI, right? So at the core of it, it is the base operating system. Like I said, EC2 offers the flexibility to have your operating system that you can run with. So having a hardened OS image is at the core, the foundation of an AMI. On top of that, you're going to have your security agents, your monitoring agents, your kind of like approved agents, which are kind of certified by our corporate security and compliance teams, to be able to bring that visibility, to be able to bring that telemetry and observability into your machine image. Then you also want to be able to make sure that you have an inventory, you have a solid CMDB that is constantly getting updated as your AMI is getting changed, as your AMI is getting built, and also as your application inventory gets further updated in your AMI. And then, this is at a point in time where the AMI is ready to receive your application images and also your application configuration. So whatever packages needs to be deployed on top of your AMI, whether it's a custom application or it's like a standard third-party application or even it's an open source, how do you build your package with respect to the application on top of AMI, which is the next step? And at the end of the day, there are services available such as AWS EC2 Image Builder or even Packer. This kind of puts through the whole pipeline, the whole automation of your AMI. And what I talked about in the previous slide in terms of making a product-centric view, having an end-to-end DevSecOps, this is all the right steps which are kind of like getting inbuilt. Like when you are at the design stage, when you're at the architecture stage of your pipeline or of your AMI, how do you bring in the failure mode effect analysis? Can your AMI identify faults? Can it kind of self-declare? Can it kind of like route itself through failures, like through automated mechanism? And when you go to the build stage, right, having the end-to-end automation so that the build part of the AMI also has all the non-functional requirements built into it, and making sure that you're able to shift left for your performance, such as SLOs and KPIs getting inbuilt as part of your build part. The validation is another important step where you're looking at how do you ensure the testing of your AMI with all the right kind of components. It's not just about functional testing or it's not about integration testing. Doing chaos engineering, invoking failures within your AMI, within your workload, and making sure that it is kind of inbuilt as part of your pipeline. That's the important step of validation. And then you go through two important stages, which is going to be the bridge between your build and ops. One is the production readiness. You want to be able to give a heads up to the production team or the ops team. With AWS System Manager, you have a lot of pre-built runbooks that you can look to deploy to understand how your ops team needs to be able to operate these AMIs and then the workload. So getting that production readiness ready, and also ensuring that it has the right kind of observability, it has the right kind of instrumentation, and the right level of automation. So that is the important step of production readiness. And as you go through the deployment and making it ready for ops, there are other key elements from a run perspective, which is very crucial for your AMIs to operate very efficiently. One, in terms of having the 360-degree view of services kind of declaring an application and AMI alerting itself when there is an issue, rather than monitoring outside in how the AMIs can inside out provide the telemetry. And when there is an issue, how can the events be correlated more effectively? Having the automated root cause analysis and making sure that if there is an issue with one AMI, with one type of build, how do you kind of automate the fixes across the board? So find one fix everywhere kind of automation techniques. And last but not least, how does the AMI feed towards the business service itself, right? So this is the important element of looking at your service excellence part of run stage to make sure that it feeds back the loop in terms of your production and your build and design stages having all coherently working towards your application or even the business services at the end of the day. Now, when you look at some of the outcomes, what an AMI factory and what an integrated application reliability services provide together, in terms of your build cost or in terms of build effort, we have seen up to 40% reduction, because at the end of the day, these are still intense efforts when it comes to getting your EC2, having your instances repaved if there is a failure, and having that complete automation done leads to about 40% of reduction in terms of efforts to be able to do build and deployment. In terms of productivity, right, whether it's your operations team or it's your build deployment teams or it's your product teams or it's your TPM, having that reduction in terms of efforts to be able to coordinate with various groups and to be able to achieve that higher level of productivity, we're able to see up to 30% in terms of reduction in terms of human capital, which kind of unlocks the potential for them to spend efforts on business value-added services. The other important element that we have talked about, while AMI provides a lot of heavy lifting to be done from an EC2 perspective and running your workloads, in terms of monitoring, when you're able to build the telemetry, when you're able to create the pipeline with the right level of automation and instrumentation, we're able to see 75% of reduction in incidents. And this kind of like leads a big outcome towards the operations team toil being reduced. And at the end of the day, this kind of leads to the business outline in terms of top line revenue generation functions also increasing. And ultimately, the most important outcome that we see with respect to having an AMI factory and the principles applied that I talked about is an always-on business outcome, right? Which helps kind of run your applications on top of EC2 instances that leads to a higher availability. So that's pretty much what I had to cover. Happy to share more details and some use cases, some of the tools, and some of the best practices, engineering principles that we have deployed in kind of creating that AMI factory and through the Application Reliability Center in our booth. Thank you so much.